We have Dr. Mahesh Goenka, Director, Institute of Gastroenterology, Apollo Gleneagles Hospitals, Kolkata with us. As mentioned earlier, our discussion today is on COVID and the GI tract, a new normal, and we have Dr. Goenka to take us forward. So, if you could just introduce the topic with our audience.
When we talk about COVID, and we have come to know about it in the last 3 or 4 months only, we generally understand that it has to do mainly with the respiratory system. We talk about fever, cough, pneumonia, respiratory failure, ventilation. But we have to understand that COVID is not restricted to the respiratory system. It has much beyond the respiratory system. It involves the neurological system, the skin, the eyes, heart, and the gastrointestinal system also. So it is both the GI system as well as the liver which can be affected by COVID, though the presentation still continues to be primarily from the respiratory system point of view.
So, in that case, is COVID transmitted through digestive system as well?
I think while we have come to know a lot about COVID in the last 3 to 4 months, there are yet some gray zones, and we are not very sure as to what is happening about some of the aspects. We know for definite that COVID is primarily transmitted through the respiratory droplets and aerosols, and it is through the respiratory system. We also know that its fomites or the surfaces can be contaminated with the COVID virus, and we can pick up those viruses on contact with these surfaces. But what we don't know is that whether the gastrointestinal system, fecal-oral route as it is called, through the stool to the mouth, whether that transmission is also possible. Let me tell you that some of the facts which have been understood is that coronavirus is shed in the stool, and the studies have shown that as many as 50 to 60% of the individuals who have coronavirus can have the virus in the stool. It has also been found out that even after the saliva, which is a known reservoir of coronavirus, even after the saliva becomes clear of the coronavirus, stool may continue to be containing the coronavirus for some more days. So these point towards stool having coronavirus, but whether this stool through the fecal-oral route can transmit the disease to a human being is not yet known. But in the absence of this knowledge for definite, we need to take all precaution so that this route is not the way of entry of coronavirus into the body.
So, does a COVID patient also have symptoms related to the digestive system?
Fortunately, not in majority of cases. All over the world, and now there are enough data on this, it has been found that about 10% of the patients can have predominant gastrointestinal system. Majority, as we all know, the common symptoms are fever, cough, pneumonia, it can be sore throat, it can be insomnia, it can be lack of appetite. But the two GI symptoms which has been commonly noticed are loose motion, diarrhea as we call it, as well as nausea. That means a vomiting tendency, and loose motions have been found, and sometimes they may be the only symptoms of coronavirus in absence of respiratory symptoms. But let me reiterate, majority of patients, about 90%, would have respiratory symptoms as the presenting symptom.
So, everybody is talking about precautions and preventions. So, coming to this COVID era, are there any precautions with GI disease patients should take?
I would say that as you may be hearing on various social media, maintaining one's immunity is very important. While there may be debate as to what actually improves the immunity, I think a balanced diet with proper carbohydrate, protein, fat, vitamins, minerals is what is required for any individual, whether he is a GI patient or whether he is a normal individual. So far as the GI patients, and we have many chronic diseases in GI tract like liver cirrhosis, inflammatory bowel disease, tuberculosis, malabsorption, irritable bowel syndrome, all these patients should continue with their medications which they were taking otherwise before the COVID era. There is one exception, and this I must highlight here, that somebody who has been on steroids, corticosteroids, to control their disease, and we know that corticosteroids are required in GI tract in inflammatory bowel disease and certain liver disorders. So those patients who are on steroids, both the patient and the physician taking care of these patients should make all attempt to reduce the dose of steroids to less than 20 milligram of prednisolone, because it has been shown in some of the studies that those who are on a higher dose of steroids leading to reduced immunity have more likelihood of getting the coronavirus as well as getting a coronavirus in a more severe form. So it is best if you have an alternative and if you are on steroid to reduce the dose to less than 20 milligrams of prednisolone or the equivalent of any other steroids.
Is there any risk of transmission during endoscopy examination?
Very important question, and I think endoscopy is a very common test which is done for majority of the GI diseases. As I said, there is not a very strong correlation between GI diseases and corona, but GI endoscopy is very important to understand. Now, we all know that aerosol generating procedures, that means procedures in which respiratory droplets are excreted out, in these situations there is a chance of transmission. And GI endoscopy, which means inserting an endoscope through the mouth or through the rectum, can initiate aerosol formation. So when an endoscopy is done in the atmosphere around the patient, there can be aerosol generation, and this can be cause of transmission of the disease. So like bronchoscopy, endoscopy is also an aerosol generating procedure and can cause problems. Now we must differentiate between different types of endoscopy. We know that endoscopy can be from the mouth. We also understand that endoscopy can be through the rectal route. Now, while we are pretty sure that the upper GI endoscopy or the endoscopy which is done through the mouth are aerosol generating and can be responsible for transmission from either patient to the surroundings or from the surroundings to the patient, where the lower GI endoscopy or colonoscopy, which is performed through the rectum, whether the same risk is there or not, we don't know. But I think it is always good to take precaution, and even for a colonoscopy procedures, all the precautions which should be taken to avoid, to prevent COVID must be taken.
In that case, sir, what should be done to reduce this risk that you mentioned?
I think it is very important that we as healthcare providers should make the procedures as safe as possible. So I think I can divide this question's answer into three parts. One must decide whether there is a need for endoscopies, to select the indication. And in this I must say that we do endoscopy for many indications. They can be as important or as urgent indication as a patient who is presenting with GI bleed or somebody who is suspected to have a GI cancers. So these are the indications where endoscopy should be done, whether you are afraid of COVID or not, because these cannot wait. On the other hand, there is other extreme where we do endoscopy in our normal practice for indications like somebody has gas formation, somebody has dyspepsia, somebody has reflux, somebody has little altered bowel habits, constipation or diarrhea, without bleeding or without weight loss. These are the indications which are not so urgent indications or elective indications. I think when you have COVID era, you can avoid, at least for the time being, to do endoscopy for these soft indication or non-emergent indication or elective indications. So that's the first, that you must choose whether there is a need for doing an endoscopy. Second is you must triage your patients, and by that I mean that before the patient is taken in for endoscopy, we must give a questionnaire to the patient to find out from which area the patient is coming in, whether it's coming in from a containment zone or so-called red zone, whether there is a history of contact or history of travel, whether the patient has fever, cough, sore throat or similar symptoms. So these questionnaire must be filled by these patients, and those who are positive or there is a strong possibility of coronavirus, it's not that endoscopy should not be done on them, but that should be done with extreme precaution. Now, after you have decided that endoscopy has to be performed, in the endoscopy room, we do a lot of things which we are not doing in the pre-COVID area. For example, we must clean the room, the surfaces, the tables, the equipments, the trolleys after each session of endoscopy, because we know that the transmission can happen from the virus which is lying on these contacts, these surfaces. Second, we don't allow too many people to enter the endoscopy area. So only the minimum required people will stay in the endoscopy area. We usually don't allow trainees to be inside the endoscopy area because less the crowd, less the chance of transmission. Third, this is not the time to train and teach. So the endoscopies must be done by the experts. This will reduce the time of endoscopy, and of course, if you reduce the time of endoscopy, the transmission risk will also be decreased. Now, everybody in the endoscopy area, depending on the risk involved, must take precautions by using personal protective equipment, including mask. And in the endoscopy area, we strongly advocate N95 or N99 mask rather than the usual mask. Finally, the instruments we use, the accessories as we call it, for taking biopsies, to making the hole, to dilate, we should not reuse them. We should use single-use accessories to the maximum possible. This may increase the cost of the procedure, but it adds a great degree to the safety. Every important institute is making their own novel ideas, and we in our setup in Apollo Clinicals Hospital, Kolkata, also with a local company, has developed what we call an endoscopy chamber or aerosol chamber. So we put this around the patient, and the endoscope goes through a small hole so that even if the patient coughs, all the cough material will be inside the aerosol chamber, and so the people around will not be subjected to transmission of the virus. So these are some of the special precautions which we have to take to make the endoscopy safe, both for the patient as well as for the healthcare personnel in this time.
So is endoscope cleaning a challenge during COVID era?
To give you a short answer, endoscopy cleaning is always a challenge, whether we are talking about COVID or we're not talking about COVID. I think while we are doing the endoscopy, as a doctor, it's our duty not to transmit disease from one individual to another individual. So it was as true in the pre-COVID area that once you are doing an endoscopy in one particular individual, this endoscope must go for what we call a reprocessing, proper cleaning, desterilization, disinfection, and then only it should be used. The COVID has only highlighted that this must be done very meticulously. So somebody who is practicing, as we do in our setup, is practicing good reprocessing or good cleaning of the endoscope prior to COVID area, need not do any change in the COVID area. But if somebody is jeopardizing even in the pre-COVID area, this is the time to change to the standard of practice for cleaning of the endoscope and the accessories. So to reiterate, you need not change your processes if your processes before pre-COVID area, in the pre-COVID area, were perfect.
So a few quick questions from our audiences here.
Yes.
The first question says, can you help us understand about the criticality of the viral disease? Is that possible to get infected with no symptoms as well?
Yes, there are two terms which are very commonly mentioned nowadays in social media. One is asymptomatic, and to add this is pre-symptomatic. We must understand a significant proportion of our population, and for that matter population all over the world, may not get symptoms. So, or may get very mild symptoms. You may have just a loss of taste, you may have little bit of weakness, and you may be harboring COVID virus, coronavirus. So this is asymptomatic. The problem is that these asymptomatic individuals, while they recover usually very well, they are also the source of infection. So if you are asymptomatic, you remain undiagnosed, you are meeting your friends, relatives, your colleagues, then you are a source of infection. Though some of the recent study from WHO has shown that the chances of this transmission of infection from asymptomatic individual is low, but it is there. So asymptomatic individuals are important for the epidemiology of the disease. The second group of people are pre-symptomatic. We must understand the moment the virus enters our body and it manifests, is usually there is a gap which is called the incubation period. It is average 6 to 8 days, but can vary from 2 to 3 days to 14 to 15 days also. So in the first 5 to 6 days, the person is pre-symptomatic. So in this period also, he may be infective and can transmit the disease to another individual while the symptoms are not there. This guy or this person is going to get the symptoms, but when we are talking about the first week of virus entering the body, he is pre-symptomatic. So these are two important components of the virus spread.
So next question that we have is, how much risk is there due to ERCP procedure for removing common bile duct stones?
I'll tell you that in my last 6 weeks or 2 months of practice, we have removed more stones than we used to remove before the COVID era. So people are coming to the centers which are taking all precautions. Now, bile duct stones, particularly those who have jaundice and infection in the form of cholangitis, is an emergency. So you have to do it. So what we do in these patients is that we always ask them the history of contact, contamination zone, containment zone. We talk about respiratory symptoms, and if possible, and this we are practicing almost 100%, all our patients before ERCP undergo COVID test. So if the COVID test is negative, he is safe for the individuals around, and for individuals around to him, the risk is always there, but we also see to it that the doctors and the staff who are in the endoscopy area are all tested and regularized before they do the ERCP. So I would say if all precautions are taken, ERCP is safe because it is required and we have to do it. We cannot wait in these patients for a long time.
So another question from a 24-year-old says, I am suffering from gastritis since last 5 years. Still not recovered, taking medicines but don't know for how long, feeling dizziness, nausea, lost weight. Please help, what should I do?
See, I think this question is not directly related to the COVID. Our topic today was primarily to talk about COVID, but since this question has been raised, I would say that don't take medicines on a presumption that it's a very slow disease, very benign disease. Somebody who has symptoms more than 2 weeks, more than a couple of months, must go for a medical advice. And in a patient who is suspected to have gastritis, possibly doing an endoscopy, doing some pH studies will be very, very useful to find out the cause of gastritis. Gastritis can be due to various reasons. Some of the common ones are drugs, particularly painkillers, antibiotics. It can be because of a bacteria called Helicobacter pylori. It can be because of stress. It can be because of excess acid formation. So all these factors could cause gastritis. So it is important that with the help of your physician, you are able to reach a diagnosis for this gastritis, both in terms of etiology as well as in terms of severity, and then go for the treatment, because long-term treatment with over-the-counter drugs which are not indicated can have side effects.
So last two questions before we end for the day. First is, are you taking extra care in GI OPD for safety of patient and healthcare personnel?
I think it's a very, very important question. While we have opened up, we have changed. We are now going for a new normal. And what are the precautions we have taken in our endoscopy, in our OPD area? I would enumerate in 5 or 6. Nowadays, there is no walk-in clinic in our OPD. So you have to take an appointment, and after a proper appointment, we will give a scattered appointment. So at 10 o'clock, there will be only 4 people who will be given appointment. At 11 o'clock, another 4 people. The idea is that there should not be too many patients waiting in the lobby. So one is that all OPDs are by appointment. Number 2, we do not allow, and we request each of them to either not be accompanied by a relative or a friend, or at most come with one friend or a relative is really required. That is again is to reduce the burden in the lobby area. Third, when you enter, you must wear proper mask. And when I say proper mask, I usually would mean a surgical mask must be worn. The patient and the relatives must wear a surgical mask. Then at the point of entry in the OPD, there is again a triage. So there is a gentleman who is sitting at the OPD, outside the OPD, and asking you again the same history, whether you're coming from containment area, whether there's a contact, whether you have GI, whether you have respiratory symptoms. And if you have any one of them, you will be asked to go to another OPD, which is called cough and cold OPD. Those who do not have that will enter the OPD. In the OPD area, all our staff not only maintaining a social distancing, but they're all wearing proper mask, whether it's a staff, whether it's a doctor, they're wearing proper mask and proper PPE as per the requirement. Now in the lobby area, what we have done is that we have reduced our capacity of the lobby by almost 50%. So between 2 chairs, there is another chair where nobody is allowed to sit. So that social distancing is maintained. Inside the room, once you enter the doctor's room, again we are maintaining a social distancing. The chairs are placed such a distance that the chance of transmission from one person to another person, where doctor to patient or patient to doctor, is less likely. Of course, we need to examine the patient, and for examination you have to come close to the patient, but we take precaution of wearing the mask, face shield, the gloves, use the sanitizer as much as possible so that the risk is reduced remarkably. Let me tell you, with all these precautions also, there may be occasional cases which may come up, but then we cannot stop medical practice because of this virus, COVID virus. Somewhere in March, April, we thought that in 2 months or 3 months time, the COVID will be out and we'll be back to previous normal area. But now we understand that we have to live with COVID for months, if not years. And so we have to develop a new normal, and that's what we are looking at.
So, and the final question before we sign off, how safe is it for people to actually come to a hospital and get their checkups and tests done?
I would tell you that we as doctors, we have not stopped coming to the hospital. We have our own family, we have our own friends, and we are worried about our own health also. So we are coming to the hospital taking all precautions which are required. So my point is that if a medical professional, a paramedical, a hospital employee can come to the hospital, a patient who requires treatment can also come to the hospital. Of course, I don't say that you come to the hospital for just loitering around. If you really require to come to the hospital, please take all precautions, take prior appointment, and come to the hospital. Every doctor, every hospital administration, hospital staff want you to be safe when you come to the hospital. We are taking all precautions, and it's true for majority of the hospital, so that your visit to the hospital is safe. So you will be monitored. We give a badge, a tag on every individual, that after doing a monitoring questionnaire, that you are safe to go from one department to another department. We have also segregated the COVID area from non-COVID area, so that the non-COVID patients or the individuals do not come in contact with the COVID patients.
Thank you, sir, for sharing your thoughts and your insights with our audience today. I'm sure we'll have more questions and we'll get them to your team and get them answered by you as well. And we hope to talk to you soon.
Thank you for having me.